Today we're going to be talking about Hurricane Katrina and the devastation it caused in the United States from August 23rd, 2005 to August 31st, 2005. It made landfall on more than one occasion, and it devastated the United States and the southern United States in Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. We're going to be seeing some videos of that time, and we're going to see some of the numbers that came out of it, the loss of life, and different things about Hurricane Katrina.
The downtown Gulfport, Hurricane Katrina is making landfall. Shattered my windows and everything's blown away down here. This is crazy.
Hurricane Katrina, a name that will live in infamy, one of the worst natural disasters in American history.
Oh my gosh.
The monster hurricane originated August 23rd, 2005 as part of the interaction between a tropical wave, a front, and also the remnants of a tropical depression. This storm quickly intensified and turned into Tropical Storm Katrina. Lack of wind shear in place across the Bahamas and the tropics, so overall Katrina strengthened quickly into a hurricane just before making landfall in Florida. Many people don't remember that there was that landfall in Florida before turning into a monster hurricane over the Gulf of Mexico. But yes, this storm was one of the ones that affected Florida. Had a very good classic shape to it as well as it moved into the Gulf. And only weakened back to a tropical storm for a short amount of time before strengthening once again. So much of the emphasis of Hurricane Katrina was on what it did to Louisiana and New Orleans and all that destruction. But we can't forget about Florida either. Those in the Sunshine State certainly remember it. 8 to 16 inches of rain fell across the greater Miami metropolitan area. But between all the wind damage and the heavy rain that caused flooding, there was about an estimated $523 million of damage across South Florida before Hurricane Katrina reformed in the Gulf of Mexico and made its bullseye towards New Orleans.
As we learned in that short video clip there, Katrina formed over the Bahamas on August 23rd, 2005, and it crossed southern Florida as a Category 1 hurricane. It turned into a Category 3 on August 29th, 2005. It caused severe damage along the Gulf Coast from central Florida to Texas. The most severe damage occurred in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now this is just a path, this is going to show the path of Hurricane Katrina. And as you can see here in the green at the beginning, it starts out as a low. It was just a wave that was coming through. Then it turns into a tropical depression. Then it turns into a tropical storm. Then it turns into a hurricane. And as you can see in the dark red, that's where it was a major hurricane. Then once it made landfall around New Orleans, it had actually dropped from a Category 5 to a Category 3 before it hit New Orleans. But it was still devastating when it hit New Orleans. And as you can see, as it broke down and as it moved across the United States all the way up into the northeast, it caused substantial flooding throughout the eastern United States. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of heads up on what the actual storm surge was on Katrina, so you kind of get the idea of how high these waters came when they came into New Orleans and Mississippi and Alabama and different places down there.
At 5:27 Monday morning, the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Katrina's eye wall. Treat these extreme winds as if a tornado was approaching. The only problem, the warning said to seek safe shelter on the lowest floor in the interior room. That would have been deadly. This is an area that was dealing with major storm surge. Katrina made landfall at 6:10 Monday morning at Buras with winds of 125 miles per hour. The storm surged 15 to 19 feet from New Orleans east to St. Bernard to Plaquemines parishes, 10 to 14 feet New Orleans and along the south shore of the lake, 5 to 10 feet the west portion of Lake Pontchartrain, 12 to 16 feet Slidell to Mandeville. Of course, the highest surge was to the right of the center. That was the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Katrina made her last landfall near the Mississippi-Louisiana border with winds of 120 miles per hour, a pressure of 928 millibars. She created a storm surge of 24 to 28 feet, 20 miles wide, that moved inland 6 miles, and in the bays and rivers 12 miles. The highest water mark, 27.8 feet at Pass Christian.
Because of Hurricane Katrina, at least 1,836 lives were lost, making it one of the deadliest U.S. hurricanes. 705 people are still missing because of Hurricane Katrina, and more than likely will never be found. It was the costliest hurricane at $88.5 billion. This is just a little picture of what New Orleans looked like after the hurricane. And there were places where the water was 20 foot deep, and the only places that people could actually be out of the water would be on top of their roof. Now, to tell you a little bit about New Orleans and why the impact was so large there, New Orleans is located on the Delta and is formed by the Mississippi River. It was first settled by the French on the natural levee along the Mississippi bank, known today as the French Quarter. Now, north of the natural levee, the land slopes down into a swamp. And around the year 1900, large pumps were introduced to drain this wetland. Water was pumped up into canals and drained into Lake Pontchartrain. By 1950, houses and buildings made up the city that we know of today as New Orleans. Now, since New Orleans rests on a delta and it is being drained, the city is continuously sinking. This is because there is peat, which is unstable organic soil found in the swamp. Now, there's 3 processes behind ground subsidence on peat. You got consolidation due to loss of water, when the peat loses volume in response to the loss of support offered by internal water pressure. You got compaction under load, both self-loading and imposed by other sediments or built structures, when the highly porous peat restructures onto a denser material. You got wastage on exposure to air, when the peat simply oxidizes and disappears, where loss of water leaves it above the water table. Now, knowing that the natural levees would not be enough to protect the sinking city, artificial levees were built. But they were not enough to withstand Hurricane Katrina. Here's just a little map. It kind of shows you, you've got the lakes, you've got the sea level. A lot of New Orleans is actually under sea level. And the flood wall along the Mississippi River and the protection levee was not high enough to hold the water back from the surges that came in from Hurricane Katrina. Now, this is how the levees failed. There were seepage throughout the levee silt. The silt washed out and formed cavities in the levees, which grew larger. It's just kind of like when you see, when we have a flash flood around here and it slowly starts washing away in one spot, and the next thing you know there's a trench there. Just think of that, but that's what it was doing to the levees there in New Orleans. And eventually the levees just collapsed. And this is the part of New Orleans that was underwater. As you can see, the majority of New Orleans was underwater at this time. The question was, should they rebuild or not rebuild? There were ethical issues. To rebuild, they need to continue building higher levees as the city keeps sinking. Is it the right thing to do to rebuild in a hurricane-prone area? That's a question that people need to ask themselves before they decide whether they're going to build in New Orleans. To not rebuild, most people want to hear good news. You know, I mean, and there's not much good news after a hurricane. In the short run, it may be good, but in the long run, who knows? Is it going to be responsible for who is going to be responsible for the victims? Well, many victims were thrown out of the trailer that was provided as shelter after the disaster, and the government aid was also cut off. So the government didn't help out as much as they would like, the people of New Orleans would have liked for them to have. And this was not just New Orleans. This was Biloxi. This was all along the Gulf Coast. These people along the Gulf Coast were very devastated. And I'm going to show you some footage here of actually what took place at that time. And remember, this was going along for hundreds and hundreds of miles along the coast.
And yet somehow, a natural disaster spirals into an unnatural human catastrophe.
We're devastated.
We haven't eaten in 3 days.
What turns Katrina into one of the deadliest hurricanes of modern times?
No water, no food.
We don't have a home.
We lost everything.
Why does it take so long to respond to the cries for help? Who makes the decisions and why?
We got to do something. You got no more food. We got babies out here. We got handicapped people.
On the floor, she's dying right now. 2 people died already.
Where's the people? Where's the mail?
Please, somebody.
We need some help out here.
Get out of here. We want to get out of here.
I don't even know if my kids are alive, man.
The facts behind the storm shed new light as we go inside Hurricane Katrina.
As you can see, the devastation was enormous. And as you can also see here in this video that we're looking at of how the winds and the rain and the surge was coming in to the cities here, it was something beyond anyone's imagination. Things were blowing around. People could not be out in this and survive. Now, this is something that went on for a pretty good while for these people in these areas. And it was hard. It was devastating. But Hurricane Katrina is known as the deadliest and most costliest hurricane that we've seen in years in the United States. And that's something that we need to realize when people talk about Hurricane Katrina. This is what they're talking about, the devastation that took place. To this day, a lot of people still have not moved back to New Orleans and the Gulf Coast area. And in addition, they have not rebuilt many of those houses and businesses and schools in those areas. Hurricane Katrina was a nightmare for many people, and they're still living it today.